Let's go!
Huge shout out to Mystic here. Somebody sent me this and like, Max, you have to watch this. And I watched the first few minutes on my phone and I was like, bro, what? Mystic goes into a lot of like industry stuff. You definitely should be checking out this dude's channel. I was just checking out to see the other stuff he made. And yeah, a lot of stuff that goes into all the shit of the industry. It's mostly PlayStation focused, but he did a full ass interview with the dudes that recently put out that Tekken 3 port. That was really good. And several other fighting game ports that are coming in the near future, potentially like Soul Calibur 3. And yeah, the harsh reality of selling classic games for modern consoles. Yeah, I think there's some points we can get in here and talk about this. I don't want to cover maybe the entirety of the video. We can skip around, but I think you should definitely check this out. If you want an understanding of, dude, why the hell don't they just port this? It's easy, right? It's just so easy. You just emulate it. No problem, right?
Like, I remember we approached one publisher. He accepted a meeting. He was like head of business development. We just pitched one game and he said, okay, so this sells, say 100,000 units at $6 each. Why would we bother? We're making $2 billion a year, $3 billion a year. Like, what's the purpose? You know, come back to me when you can do 100 games, all with modern controls and modern enhancements and remastered, and then we'll have a discussion.
Now
Jesus,
more than
man.
ever, risk-averse publishers are looking at their old IP and bringing them back with remakes, remasters, or emulation ports. With emulation, oftentimes people wonder why so many classic games have not been brought back, or
Good
why
old
they take so
Alundra.
long to come back. These games in particular present a number of unique challenges.
Bitch, do you see this shit? This has to be a licensing hell game. Published in Europe under Ocean Software, in America under Sony Computer Entertainment, and in Japan under Konami. Good fucking luck. That thing is never coming back, dude. The chance of this ever coming back in some way is nearly impossible. Who owns this shit now? Who can make the choices? They might even be dead. Don't even know.
Present a number of unique challenges that some studios are not well equipped for. That's where a company like Implicit Conversions comes in. And recently, I had the chance to speak with the CEO and ask them about the trials and tribulations of what it takes to bring a classic game back.
This is some, by the way, this is some amazing journalism on Mystic's part. Like, and all credit where credit's due. I don't want to review this entire video. I think there's some interesting chats we can have in here, just based on the way that we have been arguing for this thing to exist. And a lot of them have existed and came out to become a reality over the past like few years, you know? This goes into why it is so hard to make that shit happen. Why it is so difficult to even get this to happen, and what we can even do as fans or a person in even my position to enable this to be a reality.
Bill, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
Can you explain why certain classic games come back? What goes into choosing a game one over the other, for example?
So it's not a simple answer. There's two ways we can choose a game, but we don't necessarily have as much choice as one might think. There's work for hire projects where we're doing the work for a different publisher, typically scout publishers, looking at their back catalog, seeing if there's an opportunity to bring some of their classics back to life. Or they'll approach us asking if we can do the work for them. In that case, the publisher will request if we have the technical capabilities to do the project. More often than not, they recognize us in the space for the work we had previously done and our expertise in the PlayStation realm. And so they'll ask us to do a port of a game or a revival of a game to various modern consoles. So our number one request right now is to get PlayStation 1 onto all the modern platforms, in particular Switch. And we can do that with our emulator, which we call Pancake. And that derives from our wrapper for the whole project, which is called Syrup.
So yeah, Chad, this is immediately relevant to us because we just made a video about some of their recent work, which was the recent exemplary Tekken 3 release that happened on PlayStation. Why was that release a big deal? Well, we have just never had a definitive version of Tekken 3 from PlayStation, quite literally since the PlayStation. Even the PlayStation 2 version of Tekken 5 that had arcade Tekken 3 was not the console version. There was a lot of stuff missing. There's a lot of differences. It wasn't console Tekken 3. So to have these guys go in and work on that port and then release the port as like a standalone, like I think it was $10 when it came out. Yeah, it was, considering the input delay, considering the content, the sound, like everything, what the options were. It was the best Tekken 3 we've ever had since, no kidding, the PlayStation 1. So it's like, whoa, we got like an emulation of an old fighting game, and it actually is good.
It has all the different emulation features that we can add into it, like widescreen, rewind, save states, all the different things that you would expect. The publisher will ask us if we can do the game or not. If we can do it, we'll work with them to figure out what features they want. We don't necessarily get to choose which features are going to end up in the game. So we may suggest to the publisher, hey, you know, like this game didn't have trophies in the past. Everybody expects trophies now. Let's add them in. And they may say, no, we're good without trophies. And usually it's because there's hidden costs behind every decision. The publisher will also decide where the game is going to be released, what regions, and when it's going to be released. So when we do work for hire, we don't really have much choice. It's either we get to pick a game and they allow us to do it, or they're asking us for the particular game and they're determining all the different features. Now, the other model is a revenue share agreement. Publishers are usually more open to this business model because there's significantly less risk for them.
And as a reminder, I think Bandai Namco was the ones that reached out to these guys who have done other ports of other Tekken games as well. I think they did Tekken 2. Bandai Namco sort of reached out to them to get the work done to re-release it. So in that situation, that was like a work for hire, where we're just going to hire these dudes that have a good history of making this stuff look and sound good to re-release like Tekken and Soul Calibur 3 and Tekken 3 that just came out.
On the front end of the deal.
Much different than probably revenue share.
Revenue share agreement. Basically what we're doing as developers is we are taking on the development cost of the game. So we're choosing a game that we think can do really well. We'll approach the publisher and say, look, we think this game has a lot of appeal for today's gamers. We can add some really cool modern enhancements for it. We estimate it's going to sell this many units. Would you be willing to work with us on this? And they'll say, yeah, but we don't have any budget for that. This was unanticipated. You just kind of approached us out of nowhere. So would you be open to a revenue sharing agreement? So in that case, we take on the onus of the development costs and all the engineering work, artwork, all that stuff. And then the publisher, in exchange, will give us a portion of the share of the revenues.
Probably like a
typically
50-50, 60-40?
Like a two-way system for rev share agreement. So initially, the revenue might be a little bit higher, like say 60-40 split, 60 in favor of the publisher because you're using their IP, 40% for us, the developer, until we recoup our costs. So let's say it's going to cost us $250,000 to produce this game. So once we hit that threshold, then the revenue split changes, and then it goes 70-30 in favor of the publisher because now our costs have been recouped.
But that's the crazy part, is that for this little bitch ass old game that might cost $10, dude, you have to sell a lot of units if you want to re-release a game like Xenogears, for example. You end up having to sell, and maybe that's only coming out on one system. That's a lot of sales, man, because these things cannot cost like $30. It's gonna have to be relatively cheap, and considering its distribution method on like a PlayStation Network or something like that, you need like 100K sales. The old games do not get that much usually, man. That, especially if a game costs that much money to Jesus, dude.
But that license may last 5, 7, 10 years. It'll last a long time. So the benefits of revenue share agreement is we get revenue for a long period of time, but we're at the whim of the publisher. Are they going to do a good job publishing the game? Are they going to do the marketing that's required for it to do well?
Yeah. It's the same thing when like a movie studio makes a movie and then the distribution is handled by someone else. The distribution going to be done smartly? Are they going to actually come up with good marketing and stuff? Because we don't have the extra marketing budget. The marketing kind of comes down to the onus of the people that are distributing the game or the film or that kind of stuff. And there's constant stories across the industry of just like, yeah, our publisher screwed us, dude. There were other things that were more important to them around that time frame, and they just prioritized other stuff, and we got dicked even though your game was good.
They're going to do some QA. Are they going to make sure that legally everything's okay? And you may wonder, okay, so if there's no risk to the publisher, why wouldn't they just accept more of these deals? Because It's not costing. The engineering cost is the most expensive.
And they're absorbing the engineering costs. They're the ones putting in like hundreds of thousands of dollars to make it work on a build. Somebody said like, and Sony just throws it out on PlayStation Plus. Not entirely. You have to realize that the space that is occupied in things like State of Play, dude, there was an entire spot in the State of Play before where Brett from Capcom way back in the day is now working at Sony, and he got to introduce Tekken 3 and Soul Calibur 3 to a very large audience. That spot is literally the Sony marketing. That is the area that it will be to get people on board to know that this shit is going to sell in some way or will find its audience. And that's how I found about it, you know? That's how it worked for me.
So why are they not agreeing? Well, it's because of those hidden costs. And those hidden costs, they range from a number of different things. The number one thing being legal costs, finding out if there's any issues with IP ownership or licensing agreements. And that can range from audio to VO to even graphics in the game. And then there's quality assurance costs. And then as the publisher, there's going to be marketing. You know, are they going to spend money on booths at the event?
Dude, and that's the crazy part is that I was convinced that Tekken 3 was not going to have Gone. Dude, they pay for the licensing of Gone again? Is the little dinosaur going to be back? Because that seemingly was the thing that might have been removed. He was there. It isn't like they were able to sneak that one in. No, dude, that had to go into all this legal. And either people at Bandai Namco or whatnot had to go through all of this crazy legal to make that a thing. Is the studio for Gone still around? Even if the studio that made Gone, the manga, is gone now, that still would have been passed over. That's the way everything works, right? If somebody dies or a studio goes under, it is absorbed by a different entity in some way. Now we have to go hunt this bitch down, figure out who eventually got this, or then eventually find them and they don't want anything to do with it anymore. And it's like, well, crap. Like you run into a lot of like dead ends sometimes when it comes to that shit.
And you know, are they going to spend money on booths at the event? So there's a hidden cost to every single game, whether they pay for the engineering costs or not. Back to your question of like, how do we choose a game? So we actually have a spreadsheet of a whole bunch of games we would love to do. We can estimate using a proprietary formula that we worked on to figure out how many units it might sell based on repurchase rates and various other factors. Like, is the property being promoted in like today? You know, like is there a new addition to the franchise, for example? So we'll ask, is there enough demand for the game? It has to be successful financially for us, of course, to be able to keep the business going, but also for the publisher.
Right. This is the part
ain't gonna make something just for the hell of it, dude. It needs to have an audience to sell it to.
That's so fascinating is the financial viability of individual classic games, and that some are just fairly niche. And so could you maybe elaborate further on that as far as the financial viability of the individual classic games?
Yeah. So when we approach publishers, we bring with us a slew of data. And really what they want to see is that there is demand for the game and chatter for the game in the online community.
And if it gets into it, this is as I understood it, which is why I made the hubbub I did around Killer Instinct back in 2019 and Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and MVC back in 2021 to create these campaigns that'll get people on board to cause some conversation to be happening in a way that is like easy to follow and easy to understand.
I went to DICE Europe last year, so 2024. And one of the roundtable discussions was about getting funded for your own games. A little unrelated to us, but the idea was publishers are so risk averse right now in the industry. You don't see a lot of new IPs coming. They like the idea of reaching back to their back catalogs because those are proven titles. But at the same time, they need to see social proof that there's actually demand for it. When we present to third-party publishers, you know, Japan or even North American or European, we'll present to them a pitch deck that shows, hey, these 3 YouTubers have done videos on the game. It has 2,000 comments. People are clamoring for the game. They've talked about it for years now. There's a dedicated community that are doing mods for it. They're on Reddit. So we'll find all that data.
That is ammunition, right? That was, that was as I understood it a while ago when we were doing our campaigns to get some of these fighting games back in some way, chat. The whole point of it was to create this online hubbub in some way that creates a positive word of mouth or gives people in a position of approval to have ammunition where it's like, I can fall back that these guys have done these videos on this, or that there was this thing that happened back in the day. We aren't the ones responsible for getting it, but all we did together for some of these games to come back is that we gave them ammunition. We needed to give them a reason to know that, do they even realize that people give a shit? Do they even realize that people would even buy Soul Calibur 3 or care about Soul Calibur 2, you know? Like all that kind of stuff. There needs to be enough of an outcry online and enough built up sort of accumulation that, hey, this could sell if we re-released it. Seems that people have fun with this thing, you know?
Put it that way. And we'll look at the current climate right now. So, you know, Silent Hill 2, for example, was re-released not too long ago. That would have been a good time to do a Silent Hill Classics game because you can bundle it as a value add.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are times when we've pitched a game. This just happened. I was at Gamescom and I talked about a game that we had pitched a number of times and it never went anywhere. And then we found out that the guy who originally, the creative director for the game, died in some mysterious way in Japan, and they just do not want to touch that IP anymore because it's in licensing hell for one thing, but also it has a negative space around it that like that game's off the table.
Damn, it's crazy that happened to Bloody Roar.
For people. And that's fascinating to me. We know that this game, we don't know, but we have a strong feeling that this game would do really well. But unfortunately, it's just not going to happen for a variety of sometimes legal and sometimes strange reasons.
Yeah, because eventually, like, these things boil down to the original creators or where the property has passed hands. As it eventually went down and got to all these areas and could have become a thing, it still boils down to who actually owns this and do they care about money? Do they care about the IP? Do they give a shit at all? Will they let us use it? Like, yeah, it might just come down to some old lady that has this and they don't want anything to do with it, you know?
That exists out there.
That's so crazy. And I'm sure there's so many other stories like that, but that's the other harsh truth is that some games, like, they just simply don't work financially.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, you know, like there are games, you know, we've been asked to do, and it might sell 5,000 units at most, but it's going to take us 4 months to work on the game. That's just a project that we have to unfortunately decline, that we can't work on right now because we don't have the bandwidth and we can't risk it only selling that many units. And sometimes the cost for retro games are fairly low, like $9.99, $15.99.
Dude, you're making like $5 and you still got to split that $5. Like in even a rev share situation, game comes out and it's $10. Okay? Like that Tekken 3 port comes out, $10. Number one, you are losing approximately 30% of that to Sony. Straight up. They're the distributor. They are distributing it on their platform. The platform distributor is just going to get a cut. So Sony straight up is taking $3, leaving $7. All right? So if you're doing a 60-40 rev share off of $7, well, that means that maybe you're making $4, right? Because you're going to have to split that remainder with the people that allowed you to use their IP in a rev share situation. At the end of it, you make a sale on a game and it costs you a few $100,000 to make, and you're trying to break even, and you're only making about $4 and some change after every single purchase. So how many copies do you actually going to have to sell? A shit ton.
Kind of on the higher end, typically they're $9.99 USD. On sale, they're down to like $4.99, $3.99 on a Steam. You know, on Steam, they're even lower when you have the 80% discount days. I mean, financial viability is a big reason why a lot of these deals will not work.
And of course, one other major problem is licensing hell. So let's acknowledge the elephant in the room here. Tell me about that.
So licensing hell is, if the game is in licensing hell, that means typically that there's a whole bunch of different owners of the IP or bits of licensing within
the Deadpool game. Oh, Jesus, man. That shit went away.
And it's just impossible.
Yeah, this shit. Like, literally, no way, dude. This is why things like Tatsunoko versus Capcom, you have to understand, TVC was already an impossibility. Pretty much either Seth at Capcom or some folks at Capcom licensing and legal were able to somehow figure out Tatsunoko versus Capcom to even release outside of Japan. Because in Japan, it was all just Tatsunoko. But here, those characters are owned by so many companies this way, you can't even track it, dude. And now if you want to re-release it again, God knows where they eventually went. if they're a part of Crunchyroll or some shit, the distribution for that is now infinitely harder than it was even back when it first came out on the Wii. And is TVC a massively beloved, like huge selling game? It's a select hardcore community. Like people that love it really like it, but was it a huge seller when it came out? Actually, it bombed.
Puzzle pieces to fit together so that all the IP can be sent in one nice clean package to the developer or to the publisher so that the game can be released. And there's all kinds of reasons why that might happen. A game that's 30 years old, the documents could be long gone, or there's an addendum that was created 5 years after the game was released, but no one could find that, or it has fallen into the estate of somebody and that person has since passed as well. No one knows how to get a hold of the person. Sometimes they just don't want the game to be touched. They want the legacy to remain the same. Other times it's within audio. So a music track, for example, in a game, that's a pretty common issue where it's licensed for X number of years and they don't want to license it out to anybody else because it may change the integrity of the game. So you're stuck with it. You can't.
Yeah, like some games will just have like a specific soundtrack of licensed music, and the original IP owner, the people that made it, just don't want to re-release it without that music. And they think that if like the music's an integral part of it, if you change the music in some way, then it's screwed. So we don't really want to do that, you know?
Or because you're stuck that. And that actually happened to us. We completed a game. It was engineering complete, ready to go on the PlayStation 1, ready to be released. And the publisher had approved it, the third party had approved it, and the game got canned at the last minute. It was pulled, and it's going to sit on a shelf indefinitely. And from what I understand, after hearing more of the backstory of that particular game, it will never be released in its classic form.
Thousand Arms?
But it may be remastered because that's a totally different contract, or a remake is a totally different type of contract. The sad thing is there are some games that are just dead on the table immediately. And those are sports games and card games.
Yep.
So
this is why it sucks that old NBA jams can never come back, dude. You can release new NBA jams, but if you wanted to get like old NBA jam or NBA hang time or something, like the actual old ones, a re-release of all the old Blitz games in some way, nearly impossible. Nearly impossible, because you have to get all the licensing of literally every player from the year it was out and get approval of it. It's insane.
Games are very difficult to license if they use real player names, because you have NHL. Well, I say NHL because that's the one I play every year, but you have the NHLPA, the Players Association. You need their approval.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, Arcade 1UP managed to do this, which was always the very confounding element. There was always like, how the hell did these guys get around this? Like, they seemed to make some licensing deals that felt nearly impossible for the longest time. And it was like, dude, how'd you make this collection happen? Like, what the hell did you do to make it happen? And it seemed like there was some sort of disconnect from them being released as games and them being technically released as like in-store products / toys. They were able to get the distribution of them figured out in an agreement that did not have the severity of like a digital game or a shelf life game, like that kind of thing, which is why, yeah, like you can go buy NBA Jam cabinets. They're novelties. Yes. Like novelty toys. You can buy Blitz cabinets, all that kind of shit. That exists, dude. Marvel versus Capcom 2 with all the other NBC games. I'm like, dude, if this could exist, then why the hell can we not get this shit? You know what I mean? There is ways to make that happen, but still making it happen for every single other kind of product is not the same. It's not the same thing.
License for it. You need EA's license, for example. Figuring all that out is challenging. For racing car games, typically they'll have a license to have a particular brand of car or model.
And again, for car games, and as I understand this, I'll let him talk in a second. The license to get cars in old games was super cheap, dude. Like back in the 90s and the early 2000s, if you wanted certain cars to show up in games, they were just like, cool, this is just like free marketing for us. That's why GT1 was able to exist. That's why like even Sega Rally had like a Toyota Corolla and like a Lancia and all these cars like on the front that were able to become hero cars. They were just cool with it, man. Those licenses to use those vehicles was cheap as long as their cars looked good, and they weren't like destroyed usually, which is why many of those games did not have destruction. But the thing is, they realized how big these games got, how much money they made off of their licensed cars, that as time went on, you get to like the mid 2010s And a lot of arcade style racers lose a lot of intrigue to people because why? They're unable to afford the licensing for real cars. So now games like Forza and stuff like that have huge libraries of cars, and Gran Turismo spend a crazy amount of money just on like licensing and legal fees, you know?
For 5 years, or 7 years or something. And then after that, they stop selling the game because all those licenses have expired. And the other one in sports is advertising. So if you remember a lot of the games like Tiger Woods, they had Adidas and Titleist and all the different brands for a particular sport. And those are all licensed as well too. We have the technology to replace those textures, but if those textures are everywhere, like they're a core part of the game, then it makes it really difficult.
Yeah, and to speak to what he's saying about that, dude, chat, what is the game where like the licensing that's in it is an integral part of the game experience, from in-game logo licensing to music? Yeah. Crazy Taxi. I'm so glad people get it, right? Somebody said Pepsi Man. That's not bad. 100% Crazy Taxi. Because you go to KFC and you go to the Adidas store and you go to Tower Records while listening to Bad Religion, while listening like to Offspring. Integral part, dude. The licensing is everywhere. Take me to the Pizza Hut. And then they have versions of the game that released later on, and they had to remove that shit. If you buy the Steam version of Crazy Taxi, most of that stuff is not in the game anymore. And it's significantly less interesting. It's crazy. The licensing is, at that point, part of the experience.
And it's not really worth it at that point because it's going to cost so much time and effort to replace all those textures. Those types of games are really, really challenging, if not impossible to do.
So let's get into the specific platform side. As in, you build emulators for each system as you go, and you initially began with PS1, but why PS1?
We chose to start with a PlayStation
probably the most demand
as our main project because the demand for PlayStation games, original PlayStation games, was higher than anything else that was out there.
Dude, how many people are kind of like, we always say it, dude, we're like, give us a collection of old Resident Evil games. Why don't you just give us Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 and Director's Cut and Code Veronica? Why don't you just give us a collection of old Resident Evil games with all these knickknacks and shit? You know why Capcom doesn't do that? In their mind, they already did it. They pretty much licensed those games out to be released on PlayStation and shit. We have Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 on PSN. We do. We have like a bunch. Most of these games are like remastered. They look better, but they are effectively emulation, you know? They're not big ports, but they are like the original PlayStation games, and they work relatively good. It's the exact same thing I'm talking about with Bandai Namco right now with Tekken, where everyone's been saying, dude, can we just get a collection of games that has like online and all this stuff? And to them, they see much more value in just re-releasing the exact game it was back on like PlayStation 1 or 2 in a way that makes sense, you know? In a way that costs relatively less, instead of going in and adding in rollback and doing all this shit, making it a relatively expensive process. They sort of go through the slightly cheaper, which is to get guys like this to go in and redistribute it and re-release it in some way. Not everything can be a Marvel versus Capcom collection or a Capcom fighting collection too, but at least we have it, you know? And I agree. I wish we could be playing Soul Calibur 2 without completely shit online.
So we focused our efforts on that. And our next big project is going to be PS2. So we're working on our next PS2 emulator because the demand for that is really high.
That's Soul Calibur 3. I'm looking forward to it.
The demand for other consoles is lower. For example, we've had a few questions about the Nintendo Wii, but only a few people have asked about it. Developing an entire emulator for it for 5 to 10 games, it's not really worth it from a financial standpoint. And we would love to do it because our team loves these games and we'd love to be able to play them and give back to the community that way. But unfortunately, just we have to think like a business and make that tough decision and focus on the ones that are going to have the biggest bang for their buck.
Now, it was pretty big news, Bill, that on your site there was the roadmap section for things you're working on, and you were dreaming about PlayStation 3 emulation. So
a lot of that's good because a lot of work on PS3 emulation has come very far. That PS3 emulator we played friggin' Asura's Wrath on, they can't. So again, these guys cannot use the exact same infrastructure as like PlayStation emulation as like DuckStation or something like that, or PCSX2. Or even RPCS3. There's a lot of work that has gone into making that better over time. So like the knowledge cache of how effective can we make these games run overall has gotten a lot bigger, but they can't just go and steal it, you know? Maybe they can go and license it from them or something like that, but they cannot directly go to like the existing emulators and we're just gonna stick this over here. Like that doesn't work that way, which is why these games have their own, the pancake wrapper, which is their internal emulation solution. Like that's the way most of these companies work. Even Digital Eclipse is the same way. They have their own internal emulator that is not exactly the same thing as everybody else that produces the image and makes the sounds work the way it does.
Is there anything that you can say here?
Yeah, so we're working with a third party to help us with this. So we have a bit of a base to work off of. It's sort of a back burner project for us that we're investigating over time. To be transparent, PS2 is more of a priority for us.
Jesus, just looking at Killzone 2 for like a couple of seconds makes me nauseous as shit.
Over time, to be transparent, PS2
this the shallowest field of view in human history.
Priority for us, just because of the demand. We haven't been asked for a lot of PS3 games. It's more of a, at this point, a fun project.
And there's a problem with PS3. Most PS3 games made it out of PS3. Most of the games that were really good or really fun or have a chance to like exist in modern day in some way, a lot of them got ported. Not all of them, don't get me wrong, like Metal Gear 4 and that kind of shit. There's definitely a few outliers, right? Most of them are in collections or re-released or remastered in some way. How many games, if they make a whole ass emulator, could you even make a reasonable profit by making these games actually work in modern day?
For our engineers, but the focus right now is, broaden compatibility on Pancake or PS1 emulator, improve Syrup as much as we can, work on PS2, and then we have PS3 kind of hovering in the background as we kind of work our engineering magic there.
I think what a lot of people are curious about, though, is simply the technical feasibility of PS3 emulation. You're dreaming about it, but what does that really mean?
Because you wouldn't be able to run it on a PS4, most likely. That likely would require PlayStation 5 hardware or Xbox Series X. Like it would need in the current day, it would likely need the highest capable system just for overall overhead and processing power, because it's an emulator and it has to do a lot of heavy work to reproduce the image, right? Way more than the original stuff does, because it isn't original hardware. You need all this overhead to make it work. So could a PS4 be a good emulator system for PlayStation 3 games? Probably not, man. You probably do not have enough to make that reliably work very well.
And if you can technically do it or not.
Yeah, so we believe it's feasible. I don't think anyone expects it to run on a Switch or a PS4, but maybe PS5, certainly PS6 whenever that comes out. And next instance of the Xbox and maybe the next instance of the Switch, but we'll have to see. But we do feel that it's technically possible. It's just a matter of devoting the time and energy to it and resources to it. There's so many projects we'd love to work on, and it's always a difficult decision to say yes or no to certain projects, but we kind of have to go where the demand is.
Right. So I'm guessing PlayStation,
and on a platform that'll actually sell,
Vita's pretty low on that one too, huh?
That is low. Yeah, that's exceptionally low.
Oh, that breaks my heart.
I know. I mean, we have people we'd love to do it, but yeah, it is low.
Yeah, and it's not that they're incapable of doing it, like Vita games or PSP games and that kind of stuff. It's that what was the market share for those games back in the day? Does that line up with anything that exists now? Is there a good opportunity to line that up where it's like, hey, there's a new, like I said, there's a new like Uncharted game or some shit, so we can release this long lost PS Vita game. Here it is. Have fun with it. You can play it on modern hardware, right? Even the original game itself on the Vita probably did not sell that much. The rough ass push comes to shove aspect of this industry is that you're not going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and doing it for free.
So the other big thing we can try to talk about here is that your biggest client is Sony, I would assume, for providing classics on PlayStation Plus Premium. Is there anything even remotely NDA compliant you can say about that relationship between Sony, yourselves, and the various third-party publishers that are involved in that program?
There is nothing that I can say, unfortunately, about that particular program.
That makes sense.
I cannot confirm or deny that we worked with them.
Yeah, it's a shame too. So I
Yeah, they
know that's
definitely
the
have some sort of deal with Sony of making like a lot of their old library work. It like what they're doing right now is relatively similar to what Xbox was doing when Xbox was actually putting an effort for their backwards compatibility, and they were making OG Xbox games, Xbox 360 games work for a very long time. And they kind of stopped that compatibility, like quarterly compatibility stuff just stopped. Now these guys are doing that kind of stuff, releasing like cheap games that are either a part of PS Plus and you just get it a part of their subscription service, or you can buy them piecemeal, you know, like Tekken 3 and stuff like that, and just allow you to play these games.
one thing that you can't really say much of anything about. And for a while, people never even knew that you were the ones doing these particular games. But, you know, again, there's your hands are kind of tied on this.
Dude, and even in games like this, like they fix a lot of like the geometry shit, you know? Their PS1 emulator has options to like fix a lot of the geo problems happen a little bit still, but if they kept it at close to original resolution and they were dealing with the PS1 rendering with all the wobble, my dude, this would look like the wobbling would be significantly worse. Even I noticed that in Tekken 3 port did not have a ton of wobbling, man. They actually like ironed that out a bit.
I mean, we'd love to talk about more things, but you know, unfortunately, yeah, like there's a lot of NDA stuff, and once lawyers get involved, it gets expensive. So.
So one thing I'm pretty curious about is that you've been pretty diligent in going back to the classic games and adding trophies to the ones that did not have them. When this relaunch happened with PS Plus and these new classic games showed up, a lot of them didn't
I'm
have
super interested in the trophies
right
combo.
now, and that has led them to
You guys can check it
look
out on
back
the original
at their
video.
older titles, do remasters, remakes, ports. Has this made getting work easier or more competitive in the space?
Oh, it's a good question. I think, you know, it's an interest. I'll put it in a different way. So yes, it has made it a little bit easier, I would say, and there is competition, but we're also working together. You know, like we offer a specific skill set that some groups that are doing retro games just don't have that skill set. They don't have the ability to do PlayStation emulation, for example, right now. So we're able to work with them, and so it's more of a we're all in this together type feeling. Yeah, there is some competition.
Damn,
for
there was
sure,
a Fighting
especially when it
Force
comes to, like, the
collection.
AAA titles, like if you're trying to get a Dino Crisis type game out there, there's a lot of people vying for that game, and so you're competing against some of them. But like for
Really, chat, the Dino Crisis port that came out on PlayStation 5 looks this good? It's all upscaled and shit? I wonder if they did this one. Looks much better.
more obscure games, there's less competition, I would say. We all believe in game preservation. We all believe that it's an important part of our culture that's slowly drifting away. Digital is sort of the only way we can preserve a lot of these, and that's where emulation plays an important role.
Right, yeah. And I don't know, maybe I'm spitballing here, but like I often think about the PS3 days and PSN on that platform.
Yep, there we
you
go.
got PS1 and PS2 classics.
Dude, look
come
how
out.
cheap these games were. They were, dude, Strider 2 on PS1 Classic. I think a lot of these aren't available anymore. I don't think this store has these anymore. This stuff was great, dude.
On what seemed like a weekly basis. You know, publishers were just kind of handing those games out because they didn't really care about it. And that was like 10, 15 years ago, right? So it was kind of no big deal. And nowadays, with publishers being more risk averse and wanting to use their older IP,
Wow.
it seems like that's the thing now.
Dude, Darkstalkers 3 on PS1. That game's missing a lot of animation. Darkstalkers, wow, dude. That's what I mean. There was so many games. There was so much stuff.
Keeping the IP
PS3
closer to their
store
chest.
doesn't work anymore.
And if somebody like you approaches, it's like, oh well, maybe not. We have our own plans, and you know, it's just maybe harder in that way to get work.
Yeah. So I can't speak for what they were doing 10 to 15 years ago, but I can speak to what we hear internally now. So when we approach large third-party publisher, their first instinct, you know, if they have like 15 little studios that they're working with, or some are large, some are small, their first instinct is to give it to one of their own studios to do the work. It's only when they deem that, you know what, it's cheaper for us to just outsource this as a work for hire project and not have to deal with the QA and deal with all that stuff, because the vast majority of it will be handled by like someone like us.
Dude, that's exactly what's happening at Bandai Namco right now. 100%. Why we're getting all these old Tekken games and Soul Calibur games and shit. They clearly like do not have the extensive resources to do it in-house, so that they're getting guys like this to take the Tekken 3 ports, Soul Calibur. They're giving it to Nintendo so they can use their GameCube solutions to re-release Soul Calibur 2, like all that kind of stuff.
Then once that decision is made, then we can get inroads into that publisher. But it's tough to pass that hurdle. It's really tough to pass that hurdle. Like, I remember we approached one publisher and I was very surprised. He accepted a meeting. He was like head of business development. And, wow, accepted a meeting. We were all excited about it. We pitched. It was a disaster. We just pitched one game because I went from game from my childhood, and he said, okay, so this sells, say, 100,000 units at $6 each. Why would we bother? We're making $2 billion a year, $3 billion a year. Like, what's the purpose? What value are you bringing? And he said, come back to me when you can do 100 games, all with modern controls and modern enhancements and remastered, and then we'll have a discussion. And so that was a bit of a rude awakening for us, So like our pitch was originally just, hey, we can emulate this for you, and realizing that they need to work at a scale that makes them money, right? That gives them a reason to get out of bed in the morning.
Now, I did also want to point out that Implicit does have their own community Discord, and you guys use that platform to bring in community.
Anyway, it's a great video. There's some parts that we didn't highlight and cover, but I heavily encourage you all to check this out. This kind of takes off the veil of so much of this side of the industry that we have tried to like have a small impact on in some way. That why it is as challenging the way it is, Yeah, this is some incredible journalism on Mystic's part. I'm so glad that he did this, because the things that we try to like echo to people, why we were trying to get like all this hubbub on the internet of getting people to talk about these games and all that kind of stuff, to get there to be a realization that there's money to be had here, right? Like, you guys are leaving money on the table by not doing this. It won't cost you that much. I'll be real, for the majority of like old games outside of like Bloodborne, dude, which Sony clearly knows there's demand. Most of the old games that I have wanted to come back in some way came back. There's a few out there that are sort of like rough, like a Phantasy Star Online. Like, if you re-release Phantasy Star Online in some way, I think that can do well, but still that's like sort of, it's not exactly risk adverse. That's sort of a situation that will be kind of rough, and I'll always like pitch for it and stand for it, because I think there's definitely an audience of people that would like to play an official version of that stuff. For the most part, we're getting Tekken remasters. We got the Marvel vs. Capcom collection. We got all the old Capcom fighting games. We got the CVS games back. We got Final Fantasy Tactics back, which was crazy. Most of those things recently happened, and they were pretty damn good. The Mortal Kombat collection was unfortunately one that did not really meet the high demands as a high quality overall product with a lot of stuff in it, but the direct gameplay grievances and shit kind of sour it a little bit, and especially not having crossplay and really good online, all that kind of stuff. Oh, yeah, there's another one. We got to get Third Strike back in some way, bro. Like, what the hell? Can we Capcom, can you remaster Street Fighter 3 Third Strike? Can you do that? The last time we did it was like literally 7 or 8 years ago now. And if there's one Capcom fighting game that's out there that did not have the most exemplary port when it came out with the 30th anniversary collection, is definitely a Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, man. Come on, dude. There's a few out there that'll still definitely make money and will still definitely pull in an audience if we get the same folks that worked on Marvel vs. Capcom collection internally at Capcom and like the Capcom fighting collection too. That definitely could pull some people in.